What's up, Trekkies? It's your boy Will Wofford here with Trekker's Delight, a Star Trek-inspired podcast. Before we get started, we're going to give away $100, so make sure you like, comment, and subscribe to our channel where we will announce the lucky winner every single week. Now, welcome to Trekker's Delight.
Hi everyone, I'm Marie Brownhill and I'm here with Trekker's Delight, and this is our kickoff video for our week of First Contact discussions. We are super excited to bring this to you, and we're even more excited to start with Plato's Stepchildren, which is one of the most famous or infamous original series episodes. And now we're ready to get into the meat of it. So who wants to volunteer to fall on the sword of the summary?
Roy?
Of Plato's Stepchildren?
You just got voluntold.
Sure. The Enterprise responds to a distress signal. They get there, and I guess their ruler had been cut in the leg or something, and they have telekinetic powers, and they get this midget to do their bidding, and apparently they came from Earth. And, you know, hey, if you're a Trekkie, this is just a reminder of which one it is, right? The little guy, and making shit fly around, you know, making people do things. And, of course, the infamous or famous first interracial kiss with Kirk and Uhura. So Kirk saves the day with some speech, and they all live happily ever after.
So basically, it's a pretty standard TOS episode.
Right.
In a lot of ways. We have our standard away team mission, so it's literally Kirk, Spock, and Bones going down to a planet, then, you know, with no security detail at all, which is hilarious because they're suddenly getting a distress signal from a planet that had been reading as uninhabited, and they're like, all right, it's fine, we're just gonna send, you know, 3 of our 4 senior officers down to an unknown planet because, you know, we can do that. And then of course you get and then chaos ensues. The primary theme in Plato's Stepchildren is don't be a jerk, because the real problem is there's something called kyanide on this planet, which is known as Plutonius. And kyanide apparently is, you know, if you eat it long enough, if you absorb it long enough, then you develop magic powers, is what I'm going to go with. Right. Unless, of course, you are a little person, in which case apparently you cannot absorb the kyanide effectively. So poor Alexander ends up the brunt of a lot of really terrible bullying behavior. It's a very toxic culture. Just very, very toxic. Parman, who's the alleged philosopher king, decides that he wants to keep McCoy because they've never had to have a doctor, and since apparently he managed to end up at the precipice of death after a scratch. Did anybody else find that weird? Because I was just like, yeah. I'm like, home slice, that's a paper cut. What are you doing? Because, you know, Bones doesn't even bother to bandage him, right? There's no discussion of sutures or whatever. It's just hypo.
He looked at that guy's leg worse than he looked at that lady that had kidney dialysis.
Right. Right.
Here, take these.
And call me in the morning. Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And she grew a new kidney.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But the Parman and his other Plutonian cohort use their magic powers to force our Starfleet friends to perform increasingly humiliating activities. If you've ever seen the infamous Kirk slapping himself meme, this is actually not the first time he's done that. This is the second, because the first one was the enemy within. This is the really big one that you see with the meme. He forces Spock to laugh and cry, which, as we know, is a big deal because Spock's a Vulcan, and that can be actually kind of toxic to him.
Very harmful.
But Parman does not care. And all the while, they've already figured out what's going on. They've already figured out that it's the kyanide, and they've already synthesized a serum. They're just waiting on this serum to take effect so that they too will have the same powers that the Plutonians do. And basically, the theme here is leveling the playing field and stopping bullying.
Do you think they executed that?
I think we get about 15 minutes of solid plot in this episode, and in probably the rest of it is just insane shenanigans and a lot of Leonard Nimoy singing and tap dancing.
I like the singing. I mean, he didn't do his.
It wasn't bad singing.
No,
it
it's
really
not.
wasn't.
Well, Bilbo
Right?
Baggins,
No Bilbo
you know?
Baggins, right? But the other thing that's really interesting about this episode and is relevant to our First Contact series is that this episode features a first contact and then second first contact, because the Platonians, about 2 millennia ago from where the episode occurs, they inhabited a star apparently, or their planet, whatever, called Sinedra. It went nova. They fled. They end up on Earth. In Hellenistic Greece, basically. They decide this is the greatest civilization ever. This is fantastic. But unfortunately, as we know, Greece falls, and so that's when the Platonians just up and leave and go find go found their own utopia, allegedly based off of, that's right, Sandara. I don't know why I want to make it Sinedra every time.
I mean, today
apparently.
is Sonequa's birthday.
There we go.
The day of this filming, yeah.
So,
so
you just derailed me entirely, Roy. Why do it?
So basically, they adapt their own society based upon the Greek society, and also their political, I don't know, motivations. Yeah.
I'm not even really going to go with political hierarchy here, because I don't know that we have enough. I mean, there are like 35 of them.
So what they said, it was 38, but what they said was
I'm just killing it, guys. Killing it.
Was that it was, I mean, no, it's no big deal. So they said that that this was the greatest democracy ever created, right? So clearly what they're saying is that their government is based off of democracy, but they do have a leader who, is very fragile, but he becomes the leader because he's the strongest of them all. That's the only criteria.
And then proceeds to use that strength to abuse Alexander. And it's abuse. There's no sugarcoating this, guys. Like, I mean, they're flinging this poor guy into pillars on the floor, psychically choking him, because apparently
they can,
and they use the Force to do it, to jump franchises.
Yep. So
please don't sue me, George Lucas or Disney.
I mean, if anyone says that Star Wars is better than Star Trek, we literally covered this in one episode.
You're right.
We literally
They're symbiotic. Yeah. They actually have a symbiotic relationship, so that's it.
So what I loved about
Mark Hamill giving them.
So what I loved about this particular episode was how they use it to talk about so many different things based upon 1960s culture at that particular point in time. So there were themes dealing with race. There were themes dealing with sexism or bigotry. There were also themes dealing with size, right? So
ableism.
Ableism.
Yeah,
okay.
I call it ableism.
Okay, ableism. But I took it to mean because he specifically said size. So I also thought about weight. That's what I thought about, because he specifically said size. I'm also thinking about weight as well as how tall you are. So those were some things, but also, like I said before, they talked about government, they talked about philosophy, and one thing about their society that they didn't have though was science, and that was baffling to me.
I know.
How could you purport to be so philosophical, but there's no science?
So I think the real problem with the Platonians is they went stagnant, right? I mean, they've been sitting on Platonias for 2 millennia, and they just didn't do anything other than apparently torture poor Alexander.
They were lazy.
I'm sorry, Roy?
They were lazy. Just think of a teenager in front of video games, and they don't want to do anything else. They just want to play their little games forever, and Not a
there's a very real sense that once they absorbed enough kyanide that they developed these magical telekinetic powers that they just kind of stopped. That they were like, all right, this is cool. I never have to lift anything ever again.
So there was one part in this particular episode that I did not like, and it was
just one.
Because it was specific to I guess the queen or whatever. What's her title? Was her title even given?
No, but she's Falana. That's all I know.
Falana. So
played beautifully by Barbara Babcock.
Oh, wonderful actress. But she asked them, "How old do I look?" Which played into vanity, which also made it seem like anything that you're capable of is based upon your looks, and I was just like, I couldn't get with it.
I love Spock looks at her and deadpan goes 35, but she goes immediately to the neck, and she's just like, clearly I need better tightener going on because I stopped aging at 30.
Exactly.
Because she picked it apparently, and that's the only reason I can figure that Parman looked the way he did is because he liked the salt and pepper look.
So we're not just going to talk about that they're a race of vampires?
They're not quite.
Except they don't eat blood. I mean, drink blood.
And they don't actually leech off of anyone else. Like, this is not a Lorelei signal situation where they're leeching off life force. They're literally eating and drinking regular stuff, as far as we can tell. It just happens to be laced with the magic element. In Discovery, it was isolinium. In Plato's Stepchildren, it's kyanide.
Magic beans.
Yep. Because I rather fundamentally believe that Star Trek is not actually science fiction. I think Star Trek occupies this really interesting space between fantasy and science fiction, because there are so many aspects of Star Trek that get hand waved because that's not the focus, right? Like, it's not. We're not interested necessarily in telling a realistic story. We're interested in telling a particular type of story. And I think Plato's Stepchildren is a good example of that. Just because of the reason that Jermaine mentioned earlier, we see no indication that these people have technology other than they can apparently cloak themselves, maybe.
Right. Hide themselves from sensors, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, all we ever see them is, they levitate a few amphoras. To play the lamest version of chess I think I've ever seen.
Right, which gets into their only form of economy basically is forced labor. Poor Alexander has to do everything for them. One person has to do everything for him. How enlightened of a society can you really be? I'm sorry?
For 37 other people.
Exactly.
All I gotta say is Harry and Ron would put that man to shame in chess.
Fair enough.
I'm just saying. That's all I could think about when I saw those giant, semi-giant chess pieces move. I was like, oh,
Harry Potter.
Yeah.
That was a weird, sort of a strange sequence. I also don't want to skip over, I think, one of the more important elements of this, which is Falana makes this very sort of off-the-cuff statement about how they've been her people had been engaged in a very serious eugenics program, and then bred them for
not unlike Earth. Yeah,
bred them for contemplation, bred them for art, bred them for all of these things, none of which are practical skills. None of them. So I'm over here wondering, is Alexander also growing all the food they're eating?
He's a slave.
Yeah. Hopefully some of them are helping, because he can't do all of it. This is not possible.
I think it's one of those situations where you're not supposed to think about those things. You're supposed to go with the story. Kind of like we never see them go into the bathroom and things like that. Unless
you're not wrong.
Tarantino movie.
Wrong. I am absolutely 100% convinced that is exactly what's going on. But I find myself kind of watching this episode and just not being able to keep my mind from wandering, because there's a lot of abuse of power going on.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, they don't have science, which means they don't have medical arts, which means a paper cut nearly kills Parman, and they have to summon Dr. McCoy. And then they decide they're going to keep him. Like, there's no conversation, there's no consent issue. It's not like, hey, bro, like the Farini later in For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky. There's at least a mild consent issue going on there. There's none of that. Parman just says, we're going to keep you. And then he goes on to describe what McCoy's duties are going to be. And McCoy's over here going, whoa, hold up. No, I'm not going anywhere. And this is when Parman comes up with just the most ridiculous series of tortures I think I've ever seen. This is where the tap dancing comes. This is where the singing comes in. This is where Spock crying on...
I'll be sure to include all of those photos because I'm sure they'll be really interesting. I'll tell you what this actually reminds me of, too. It reminds me of Seven when she got on the think tank and they tried to keep her against her will.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's also the Collector from TNG as well.
Data, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
He tries to keep Data.
Right, exactly.
I think the name of the episode is The Most Toys, and that particular character is played by the able Saul Rubinek.
Mm.
I am going to redeem myself for Sundara. I am going to redeem myself.
So I guess for me, I guess what I'm interested in is, okay, so it is technically not a first contact, but as far as the Enterprise is concerned, it is a first contact.
Mm-hmm.
So what did we see in that episode that was reminiscent of a typical first contact situation?
So I picked this one because it's typical of what I'm going to call the TOS first contact situation, which is to say that TOS did not flesh out the concept of first contact the way TNG does. Remember, we're kind of in the cowboy era, guys. We don't really have a prime directive per se. We have like some qualitative suggestions that Kirk only pays attention to when it's convenient. Pace of the action. Sorry, something's caught in my throat here.
It's Wagon Train to the Stars.
Exactly, that's what I was thinking of.
Right. So again, like, I mean, there's no sort of acknowledgement that this is a new people. There's no sort of, I mean, other than we get information dumps from Barbara Babcock, who again does so much with those lines, and she just drips condescension. It's amazing.
Beautifully.
Right? I mean, she's fantastic. Like, I kind of am like, Parman, please shut up. I'm really more interested in your wife.
Look,
this is also not the first time I've said that. So
that one scene when Kirk was about to kiss, or I should say that Kirk and Uhura were about to kiss each other, and she looked so delighted and yet so deliciously evil at the same time. It was like, God dang, what is really going on? Like, she did it well. She did that well.
And she's fantastic. Like, I mean, and doesn't she end up as like a series regular in Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, where everybody is nice?
Oh yeah.
The only thing that I remember was this one scene where she ran what looked like a room full of a bunch of women, and she slaps one of them. And I don't know whether they were escorts or hookers or.
That's Uhura.
That's
Nichelle Nichols. No, I'm just playing. Nichelle Nichols had a movie just like that.
Okay, because all I gotta say is she. That's what I thought we were talking about. So because well, she's not bad, but still, all I heard was that look before the kiss. I said, she probably just did that scene when she slapped that woman, and then she comes onto the set. She's getting ready to kiss Kirk, so she's probably like in between worlds at this point. But I was lost. I'm sorry.
Or this bodes well for our first contact series. But going back to Jermaine's question, do we think the 60s culture impacts how they view a concept like first contact here?
Impacts how?
In the sense that, our next episode Signposting is going to be First Contact. Not the movie, guys, the episode.
We're saving that for another time.
We are. But, so in First Contact, the episode, not to steal that episode's thunder, First Contact is a source of fear, concern. The alien race, the alien species that Riker gets lost in, isn't ready, and they know they're not ready. And it turns into this kind of interesting tension between people who are anti-science and need to be the center of the universe, and people who want to go to the stars and want to be part of something bigger. We don't get that, I would argue, as a First Contact concept anywhere in TOS. So, what do
in Enterprise? Well, in Enterprise, they showed that concept a few times where people were divided and when they weren't ready.
Yeah, but that's still not TOS, my dude.
You're right, it's not TOS. Yeah, it's not.
And it's also 2001, so there's a very different different vibe going on there. This is 1966, 67.
So are you asking, did they portray that correctly, or are you asking,
I'm asking, do we think the fact that this is a 60s story, or that this is a Star Trek story in the 60s, because we know we have wonderful classic science fiction narratives about different types of first contact and the terror that elicits. I'm thinking The Day the Earth Stood Still here. But that's not what's going on in TOS. And that doesn't ever go on in TOS.
Roy, you take this one.
War of the Worlds, Independence Day. I think, like you said earlier, they hadn't really fleshed out what the Prime Directive was and everything else and all those rules until later. So I think we're trying to judge what they were doing in TOS using the lens of our 21st century, so to speak. You know, because we've got a handle on it. We know exactly what it is, but they were still trying to figure it out back in the 60s. Is that where you're going with that?
Because at the same time, they had just came out with, if I'm not mistaken, The Day the Earth Stood Still.
Right.
And
they're thinking that right now. They're like,
I think where I kind of want to go, where I want to go with this is there's a very real absence of fear of the other.
Of fear of the other.
In TOS. Like, that is because fearing what is different is antithetical to Roddenberry's vision of the future.
And that's because there were things like War of the Worlds and...
Are you talking about the War of Worlds when they when a lot of people freaked out by listening to the story over the radio and they didn't put a disclaimer in the beginning?
Right.
That went over well.
They actually taught me that in college. So, and don't act like y'all old enough to remember that. Y'all weren't born yet. So, like, I thought that was.
I did hear about that.
I thought that was
interesting. Yeah, but I heard about that.
Yeah.
I mean, it was aliens, and all the aliens were bad guys.
And they took it literally. So.
And in some ways, the aliens actually become analogs of hostile forces that existed at the time.
Right. The other.
Right. And I think, and while I think the Klingons really do kind of map in a lot of ways to Soviets, or perceived Soviets, I don't think that's exactly what they were doing with the Klingons. Which
they reminded me more of Huns.
I'm sorry?
They reminded me more of like Huns or Mongols or something, you know?
Yeah. I mean, let's be
very
real.
Barbaric.
Like, TOS era Klingons, not the least racist thing I've ever seen.
Yeah.
as that goes on.
I'm just sitting here like, it's one of those things that another reason why I never really finished TOS, other than the fact that I'm preserving it, you know, for myself. I guess there's no point now since we're getting literally new Trek every damn week. But I'm here for it.
Right?
78 episodes.
as I'm here thinking about the Klingons, not to change the subject, but as I'm here thinking about Klingons, I think about what is the perfect adaptation of the things that certain Americans hated the most back then. How do you combine all of that into one species? And now, while I know that,
and then you get the episode of Private Little War.
exactly. So we get Soviets, we get African Americans, and we get anyone else that you pretty much don't like. You put them in one, you got a Klingon. And I guess my question is, I can see how the sexism and the toxic masculinity can go through all of Roddenberry's fingers. I can see that. What I don't see, what I don't understand is, and I can even get behind the fact that they didn't have money to choke a horse back then to do any prosthetic makeup. I can get behind that too. What I can't get behind is the intended adaptation of what the Klingons were meant to represent. Because we all know that certain species were meant to represent certain groups of people in the world. So what was Roddenberry thinking when creating Klingons or writing Klingons when they had their first contact, even though they had already met, but when they had their first contact, which I hope we discuss later on. I know I'm off topic.
I mean, because Roddenberry has fully embraced Western liberalism and American exceptionalism.
Right.
All of that's also very deeply coded in Star Trek's as a franchise's DNA, if you will. But one thing I gotta say, what I love about the way the Klingons are portrayed, we're gonna set aside a whole bunch of stuff for this.
Right. Just like the Pulaski thing, we're gonna set aside a whole bunch.
No, we're not setting it aside. That is never not gonna be an issue.
Oh man! I mean, I hate to say that you're wearing her uniform right now, like when she was in TOS. Wasn't she? Didn't you wear red?
No, Diana Mulder was an ambassador for Is There in Truth No Beauty?
Jermaine, I didn't hear not one word you said.
You're muted, my dude.
You're muted.
My bad. Sorry. Had a whole conversation. Don't worry about it. Keep going.
Yeah, Diana Mulder, Next Generation, Pulaski. Yeah, they get confusing.
Oh,
when you watch them all at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, she was she was only in Starfleet as Pulaski.
Really?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she was an
ambassador.
ambassador.
Like she ends up. That is, in fact, she ends up. Is that Diana Mulder? Well, maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. I don't remember that episode. Which one is that?
Yeah, I thought she had played one episode in TOS.
I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew I wasn't crazy.
I mean, basically what he's saying is you look very attractive.
You told me I was Pulaski, so I'm not letting that go.
Oh well, I tried. Let's see. It's called played in the episode of Why You Gotta Make Me Go Through All These Links. It's too much work. Here we go.
Miranda Jones or Anne Mulhall?
Miranda Jones. Isn't Miranda Jones Is There in Truth No Beauty?
Yeah, so that it had to have been Anne Mulhall.
Oh, she kisses Kirk.
I mean, everybody kisses Kirk. Like, I mean,
he was an astrobiologist.
So, but going back to what I wanted to talk about, which was
we got
nobody ever hates the Klingons because they're alien, because they're radically different. We hate them because of their politics. We hate them because of their aggression. We hate them because of what they're doing. And I think that's a really good and a good differential between TOS and then we get into TNG. Because the species in that particular episode does fear the difference, does fear the alien, does fear that which is unknown, to the point where one dude's willing to commit suicide and blame it on an alien in order to just force everybody to cancel a warp project. That's intense fear, and we don't get any of that in TOS.
So you're saying they were ahead of their time in that regard?
There was no fear.
They judged by actions and not by just who they are.
I think that was a very real choice that Roddenberry and his team made. And I'm interested in why that particular choice gets made. Because I think another outgrowth of that particular choice is going to be having Uhura on the bridge,
Yes.
having Spock on the bridge, having Chekhov on the bridge. Because again, guys, like this was huge in the 60s to have a Russian on the bridge.
I know.
Sulu. Sorry, bro.
Machismo of the 60s. Fear was a weakness. That's when men were men and, that kind of thing.
Also, men and women were extremely short skirts.
Machismo. Yeah.
Also, I think it had a whole lot to do with Roddenberry himself and his idealism. And you juxtapose that with what was going on in the late 80s and the early 90s, especially once Roddenberry died. It was like the floodgates would then open, and then they were able to infuse all of those things that you're talking about. Even while Roddenberry was there, he kind of relented. He was just like, okay, you know what I'm saying? And so all of those things crept in.
Yeah, it wasn't until the late 80s and 90s that men were allowed to be sensitive. I mean, I lived through that. I was born in the 60s, and I watched the evolution of how men were, and they basically had to change because women were becoming the breadwinners at that point, and so the roles had to be more equal. So men had to be sensitive if they wanted to survive. So the shows, the TNG reflected that because that was the time. But of course, the 60s was post Ozzie and Harriet, where women were in the kitchen, cooking, and the men were like, manly men. So I think it's the machismo and the lack of is what caused the lack of fear. They weren't allowed to show that.
And I really like how this particular episode turns that concept of machismo on its head. Because, a lot of the driving force of this episode is that Parman is humiliating Spock and Captain Kirk by making them do those ridiculous things. And there's a certain level of violation that's going on here. And I like that it doesn't automatically go to the women, because in a lot of TOS episodes, it does.
It does. Yeah.
Right.
Something. I guess I'm changing the subject just a little bit, but there was a moment when Alexander was just like, kill him, let him die.
Yeah.
Early on. But so the idea was, okay, so if he dies, the assumption is that she will take his place. And it wasn't really clear to me whether or not she wanted him to die or she wanted him to live. It wasn't clear to me, and I wonder what you all thought about that moment.
I think Philana's a snake. I really think that she is. On the one hand, she enjoys Parman because I think she really gets off on the same things he does.
Oh.
But on the other, I think she would also like to be doing those things, and she hasn't been allowed so much leeway as Parman had because he was stronger.
Yeah, she wanted the power too.
Sure. Yeah, she's terrifying. I mean, I cannot fail to give Barbara Babcock like amazing props for what she did in such a short period of time.
I do have a question. In the beginning, when Alexander said, when he said, "Hey, these people only try to help. Is it really necessary to let them die?" Was he talking about the dude himself who had the paper cut, or was he talking about the Enterprise crew?
The Enterprise crew.
Enterprise.
Okay. Mm-hmm. So he was talking about that. Okay.
Yep.
So, and this is gonna suck, viewers. Please don't hate me if you see this. No, it's okay to hate him because the Pulaski thing.
Okay. All right.
He's like, peace out.
Wait, what? What is going on? You can't do that.
I cancel it. I am cancel culture.
I'm taking my ball and going, oh, I don't want to play with you.
I couldn't help it. I couldn't help it.
Yeah, seriously, like
No.
when we finally get Truckers Delight swag, like there's just gonna be a T-shirt that just says Pulaski on.
I'm saying no. Okay, guys. Okay, there's a backstory to this. There's a I gotta tell it now. I gotta tell it. So
Hold on. I'm gonna need another drink.
you
Yep.
Now this episode aired about a month
love
ago
it.
from the time of this recording. Me and Manhel Eunice, we call him Manny, we did a what if on and we're probably going to have to do another what if on our guest co-host as well. But we did a what if on our main show co-host and what Trek characters did they most likely resemble in characteristics. For me, I thought that I was more Deanna Troi, the empathic, the listener, but still doesn't take no shit, will act crazy when he or she is drunk. So, like, that's me. Well, Manny thought that I was Wesley Crusher. And I said, which Wesley Crusher? The one that blew up that one guy's ship? Or the kid that had used bubblegum to save the ship? Or the one who actually got the uniform later on and became protege to a traveler in the evolution of humanity? I need to know, because don't give me the shut up version, Wesley. And he said, oh, all of it. I said, oh, okay. Well, anyway, so that came from Manny. So then they jumped over to Jermaine, and we both agreed that it was definitely Geordi. All hands down, no question about it. Definitely Geordi. So just that. Then Manny himself is definitely Phlox. He is Phlox in every sense of the word. Down that I hope to get him a Phlox uniform one day. Then Marie. Now I said, you gotta understand where I'm coming from with this. Let me get out of here. Hold on. So you gotta understand my side of the story, because
she's dying laughing.
She's dying right now. So okay. I said that she reminded me of female Q. Basically Q's eternal wife or ex-wife or new whatever, okay? She what are you doing with that dog? I'm not talking about the puppy.
Susie Plaxton. I love her. She was amazing.
Susie. Yes. She was just as badass as Susie from Rugrats. So so I'm thinking that's Marie. Manny, on the other hand, said, well, she gives me some Pulaski vibes. I said, why? And that's when the conversation came up about Marie's determination to find out truth, to get things done no matter what, to juggle a billion things at one time, because she's literally Supermom. You see the uniform she's wearing right now, and she keeps calling herself pasty white, though I disagree. And
I'm kind of reflective. Like, I'm literally looking at this and I'm kind of reflective.
Yeah. And so I said, okay, as far as determination and work ethic,
get a lower wattage bulb.
Right. So as far as determination and work ethic, minus the racism and the ignorance goes, that's Marie. Well, Marie found out. I actually told Marie. I actually told her, and she didn't hear me that day. and then 2-3 days later, she messages me, and I just knew. It's just you. I know only 40% of communication goes through text messages, but when you are very close friends with someone and they text you a certain way, y'all, Marie used my government name. She just said William ... And I was like, oh shit. And she was like, really? And I said, look, and she watched it. She knew that I agreed with it, so I'm kind of thrown under the bus. That's the whole backstory. You got to get on Truckers Delight and get every. For example, Marie, yo bitch ass.
However,
this is why I'm the
Roy is like, I can't.
I know, like we're gonna lose Roy. Like he has his disapproving dad face on.
There's a funny dad face.
Hey, That's age discrimination.
Yeah, that's
I'm
very
a mom, man. Like, I
that's
also have a
ageism.
disapproving mom
That's
face,
called
so-
ageism. Can we talk about ageism in Plato's Stepchildren? Is that a thing? Like,
So that was also an interesting lack of, like that it was missing was weird.
yeah.
Except that we then have that weird exchange that Jermaine talked about earlier with the women but again, women have to look young and svelte and all of these other things. And not that the guy who played Parman wasn't in great shape, but like he was very clearly older and was being coded as being older.
Like he's older than 2,300 years old, right?
I mean, he's
Yeah.
like, I don't know.
All of them had to have been.
Because this is a question that I had actually. Now that we're back on the topic, and I'm going to do my best to stay on the topic.
Mhm.
She said that they did some genetic manipulation and all that other stuff. Basically, no different than what Earth did, or at least on that same course of what Earth did later on. And she says, and we're the product. Okay, this is what I'm trying to understand. If you're the product and you're 2,330 years old, wouldn't that put you at the very point where you were on Earth?
Yeah, they explained that.
I need that explanation to be explained to me again. Like, how does that work if later on you did genetic stuff, but this started on Earth? Clearly, they didn't have the technology on Earth. They could leave whenever they will and please, but
I didn't think
it's not quite clear that they exchanged, their science or their technology with humans. I don't think that's what they did.
I mean, judging by the fall of Hellenistic Greece to the Roman Empire, I'm going to go with no, they didn't.
No.
maybe they did something to give.
My read on this is that these are not, these aren't necessarily Platonians that were born after Sandara. I'm going to get it. There it is. After Sandara went nova or exploded or whatever. My understanding, actually, and this is another good point that I kind of want to talk about, is that these are Sandarans that ended up on Earth and lived forever, and then eventually decided to chuck themselves onto Platonius. Now, does that necessarily work with everything that she said in the episode? No. But it's also the only logical thing, because you'll note no one has children.
Mm-hmm.
No one has children.
No one has children. And the way Philana talks about it, I don't think they intend to have children. I think they literally have decided that they are the pinnacle of their evolution. There's no point in going any further because you can't improve on perfect.
Yeah, they're so insular of a race. See, that's a problem for me. Societies that are very insular. No. Societies that are very insular, they tend to think that they're better than everyone else. But it's really because they're not exposed to everything that's out there. And so, to borrow a term that Marie uses all the time, that's very problematic.
Whereas what's interesting about the Platonians is they were exposed to a different culture and actually attempt to pick it up badly, which is that's the joke that Alexander makes at the beginning of the episode when he's like, we consider ourselves Plato's children, but really some of us think of ourselves as Plato's stepchildren.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry.
Because on the one hand, Alexander is, theoretically part of this culture, this group, whatever. But on the other, he's on the outside. He's ostracized.
Mm-hmm.
I need to understand is, since he didn't inherit any abilities, what is his age?
Same as them. That's the only thing that he was able to do. He was able to basically not age.
Yeah.
But he wasn't able to. His body wasn't able to absorb whatever what's the name of that nutrient? It starts with a
Cyanide.
Cyanide.
His body wasn't able to absorb that, and so he couldn't develop those powers.
Oh, okay.
And, as with everything else, having power, and in this case, the society defines that power as magical juju, is what leads to governance. And that's and that brings us back to what the episode was trying to discuss, which was, that's not the way to be.
So I think part of what was the problem with their society was that they just didn't evolve. They didn't see the need for evolving. And I guess the attempt to have Bones be part of their society would have been an attempt to evolve, because now I guess they realize they need medicine. But they just went about it in all the wrong ways.
I mean, except that Bones is basically going to be a slave. Like, every time somebody has a hangnail, they're going to be like, Dr. McCoy!
Well, he will.
I'm
I mean,
dying.
clearly he would have to eat the food, and he would be able to develop powers, right? So no, he wouldn't be because they wanted to indoctrinate him into their society. They weren't trying to indoctrinate Spock or Kirk, just him.
Oh, they'd be hell to pay if they got Spock over. I'm just saying. So
the episode ends with Kirk and Spock, and I think to a lesser extent Bones, having developed, the serum takes effect. They develop the same power, force, as you will, and they're able to retaliate and, in fact, overpower Parman, Philana, and the rest of them. And what they do is they extract promises from Parman that they're going to reform, and they're not going to be quite as bullying as they have been.
Right.
Do we think that's going to happen?
Didn't they revisit this in Lower Decks?
Maybe. No. I don't remember.
Well, okay, so Alexander is going to leave with them on the Enterprise. And so they're no longer going to have that slave, right? So things are going to have to change, at least to a small degree.
Whoever's next in line.
Because evolution only happens when challenge is met. If there's no challenge, there's no evolution. And since he had a slave, it's really no different than the Americans. It's like when you don't have slaves anymore, albeit whatever reason you interpret to think of it, there's no more slaves anymore at the time. There was no slaves anymore. So they had to think of ways to, okay, our human tractors don't work anymore. We probably need to build an actual tractor. You know what I'm saying? So now that their little minion is not there anymore, bless his heart, they're forced to have to evolve now.
Philana's gonna have to do some laundry.
Yeah.
This is not gonna go over well.
I hope she knows what detergent is.
Right?
And she doesn't eat the pods.
Oh yeah, pods. Do not eat the pods. Do not do it. As a matter of fact, I'm sure y'all met Cinderella along the way. Read her diary. She'll give you some pointers, because clearly y'all didn't evolve to have a damn washing machine.
Right.
But there is something I wanted to say, because it took me a while to remember this episode. I haven't actually watched it, but I did watch that scene, and I included this scene in a documentary that I did in college. It was my senior project. It's called Theater and Dance Perspectives, and why we dance, why we act, why we sing, why anything related to theater at all. For me, I use this to talk about my most absolute favorite Black history story was basically why Nichelle Nichols chose to stay on Star Trek. And Plato's Stepchildren came up in that conversation, and
the Martin Luther King connection.
Yes, absolutely. He saw it, and so it was like, yeah, like, what are you doing? Go back to New York and sing. I understand that's what you love, baby, but I'm not telling you no. I'm telling you, do you realize what you've done here? Like, you've done, kind of reminded me of what the Board Queen said. You've done something far more dangerous than you've realized. What?
You've impressed me.
Like, right? So
I love Annie Wershing, by the way. Like, mad props to her. Like, she was fantastic.
Mad props to her. But yeah, I included that scene, and I knew the significance of the moment because it gave theatrical birth to loads of actors and actresses that we know today, as well as scientists. So that's huge, and I remember including that, and that's my reason. That is the reason why I act. That's the reason why I sing. That's the reason why I perform. Like, and because I'm happy, and his eyes on the sparrow, and he watches over me, and all that. But Nichelle Nichols is I love her. So if she could be like goddess of the universe, I would be like.
So that's a great segue into talking a little bit about why this episode is so important and why it's so famous / infamous, which is of course the kiss sequence, right? And basically they kind of wanted to fudge it. They wanted and it's kind of dodgy because it's a situation where Parman's making them do it, but as actors, William Shatner and Nichelle Nichols wanted to fudge it, right? Or didn't want to fudge it. They wanted to go forward with it and make their statement. The directors, the rest of the crew were kind of like, yeah, let's fudge it. So Shatner and Nichols flubbed every take but the one that involved the kiss, because they wanted to make their point. And it's crazy, right, that you have such a significant point that's being made in this bonkers episode, and yet it's not, because this bonkers episode is about dealing with power imbalances and accepting differences and rejecting preconceived notions based on a physical difference. And I kind of love that. Plato Stepchildren, fun fact, actually got banned in a number of southern states and was not able to be aired because it was deemed too inflammatory because of that kiss sequence.
Wow. I mean, of course, southern states, I gotcha. But it's just, even just to hear that out loud is still a wow moment for me. It's just like, wow, you hated us that much. When I say you, I mean 1950s, 1960s era America. Like, you hate Southern Americans. You hated us that much, while you were banging your maid as soon as your wife went out to go get groceries, but you had no problem. Like, okay. Or calling her mammy and letting her raise your children. I'm sorry, I'm gonna go on a whole tangent. Let me shut up. But it's just stupid. It's just stupid. It's freaking stupid. Like, come on. Like, I'm glad that you're dead, gone, and dust now. You're literally dust. Like, you are so old.
I'd be real careful.
-600.
Again, not everybody from this era is dust.
Not yet, but they're getting there. As soon as they cough, I see baby powder, like, just.
Yeah, you lost me there, my dude. All right.
What's the observation, Roy?
Yeah.
So, I want to mention it earlier, but we kind of got sidetracked. So they patterned their world from ancient Greece, right?
Badly.
Yeah, so there was a lot of episodes of TOS where they would take something from what they remembered of Earth, like Trelane and Squire of Gothos.
Yes.
Piece of the action was, the 20s.
Patterns of Force.
Patterns of Force. Yeah, all those. It was
Which is another one of those episodes that got banned.
Yeah,
From
because
Germany,
of
in this case.
the Nazi theme. Yeah, definitely. So there's a lot of little bits of Earth. And what's that one where Kirk recited the Declaration of Independence at the end?
A Private Little War.
Was it Private Little War?
Yep. Because remember, they end up with the American flag, and he's talking about the Constitution.
Yeah, it might have been that one. Yeah, so there's a lot of episodes that were like little bits of Earth's history that they were going into. It was just an observation.
So what was everyone's favorite moment? I know that there were many problematic moments, but what was their favorite moment in this episode?
Jermaine, you're still muted.
Jermaine, you're mute.
We're going to
Sorry
take
about
away your power to mute yourself.
You know
Like,
what?
He does that anytime he farts.
Go to bed. Oh, right out on top. Oh my god.
Right.
that.
Here's the
So I had two moments. I'll only share one though because we haven't talked about it. Alexander, when Alexander basically came to the realization, hey, look, I get it now. You all are completely different. You all see me differently. I wish I weren't so afraid. If I hadn't been so afraid, I could have warned you. You could have, you could have done this, you could have done that. If only I weren't afraid. And to me, that was almost like it was, in a way, it was saying we're all, especially those people who feel that they're being exploited or they're part of the downtrodden class, you almost always feel afraid, right? But once you get over that fear, you understand your power.
Yeah.
And so to me, that's what he was communicating in that moment.
that's pretty solid.
Not bad.
I'm feeling really terrible because, I will never not laugh about Spock tap dancing around Kirk's head and like putting his boot on his nose.
That's
Spock
definitely
singing.
a
Yeah,
fun
Spock
moment.
singing for me.
I would say for me is as soon as I don't know yet, but I'm just I don't want to say the kiss because that's too typical. Like so far, what I liked in the 15 minutes that I did watch.
I appreciate your honesty here.
Yeah, and I'm gonna go and I am going to finish this since I am here because back then they did like what was they did like square picture back then. They didn't have the widescreen yet, which is perfect for this phone. So, and I'm here for it. My favorite moment in the 15 minutes. Let's see. That 15 minutes was a long time and it was a long walk.
I'm gonna need you to pick a moment.
Okay. It was. My favorite part.
Oh my god.
When they beam down.
My favorite part was when everything was flinging around in the air. Here's why. Because just a personal opinion of mine, since TOS even into Discovery does it 10 times better. So I'm gonna say up until Insurrection. Every time something flings, every time they get hit, every time something flies in the air, you knew it was on a string. You knew it was just flying. It was the silliest thing. It put Pinocchio to shame. Like, I liked all that. And the way that Kirk addressed it, like, you gotta stop him. You gotta stop him. I'm going like, are those punching sound effects that I hear? Like, I just liked how silly everything was, and they were trying to be so serious.
This is the era that gave us Adam West. All right.
Yeah. So that was my favorite scene in those 15 minutes. Yes.
Well, if you like stuff flying around, then you got Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, when they're using their Force thing to move stuff around and hit each other with. And those look cool.
Again, for all the Star Wars fans that are out there, while we got literally 60 seconds left, if you want to know why Star Trek is better, and I'll take it to opposite tracks with this, watch Plato's Stepchildren. We have wholeheartedly addressed this.
All right, guys. So that's going to conclude our Plato's Stepchildren discussion. As I've mentioned several times, we are going to be going forward through various other installments of the franchise and their first contacts. So next episode, we're going to deal with First Contact. And then after that, we're going to do Time Capsule from Voyager, which is an amazing episode, a Robert Picardo-focused episode. Then we're going to do Little Green Men, and we're going to go from there to Congenitor, which is a very problematic and very fun episode to hate on. And then we're going to do Species 10C. So hope to see you back. Come explore First Contacts with us. And thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Now, again, if I'm gonna say this again because we're near the end of our show. If you are our allies, we are not talking to you. We are not talking to you. This does not. Pop. Okay, we're not talking to you. Stop trying to take our and make it your goddamn business. It ain't got nothing to do with you. It ain't got nothing to do with you.
Our experience of grief independently.
Bruh.
Yes.
I love that they're in the comments.
So much is like I'm just reading the comments.
Yeah. They should brought their child out. It's such a good point, Will. God, that's such a good point. And he's really thought about it too. You should be here. William, get over here.
I thought he had a girlfriend on Insta. It's been ages since I've mucked about, but
Okay, moving on. Let's move on.
we gotta move on.